Hey guys, I'm Urizi. This story is all about what if Sakura's character was rewritten. A rewrite of Sakura, in which a blunt and eccentric OC is placed into the body of Sakura Haruno at the start of the series. Nothing at all could possibly go wrong. Before we proceed with the story, please like and subscribe to this channel if you liked the video, and don't forget to check the description for the other works of the author if you liked the story. Let's start. Chapter 11, A New Home. Disclaimer, Dark Petal 16, do not own Naruto. Warning, angsty beginning, happy ending. Some call it bitching. I call it verbal release therapy. Anon. Kakashi's POV. Kakashi took a deep breath, feeling his heart slowly settle down as the all-clear signal shot throughout the sky to signify that the last hostile had been defeated. It was well on into the evening and Kakashi felt a little tired. Not enough to warrant any concern, he never encountered an enemy of equal caliber to face. The only thing that provided any significant stress for him was the countless civilians and property he had to be mindful of, in addition to the sheer quantity of pests he had to deal with. He was entirely unscathed, unsurprisingly, and despite the grim situation, he was content. As long as he ignored the nagging sense of worry he had over his students, he was at least. He felt confident that his students survived the invasion. He knew for certain that Naruto would be next to impossible to kill due to Kyuubi. He personally saw Sakura off to the medical tent, and Sasuke was too cunning to die to the low caliber of Otagaku or Shinobi. Still, it would be irresponsible of him not to check in on his students. And if it assuaged the tiny bit of concern he had towards them, well, that was merely a bonus. Naruto and Sasuke were the easiest to track down, since the Umbu team personally secured the duo as soon as they could and took them to one of the high-security hospitals that was left standing. All he had to do was pop in and the Umbu guarding the duo allowed him to see them without any fuss. Naruto was covered in bandages, but snoring heavily and looking utterly pleased with himself. Kakashi knew he would be recovered by the next day, if that. Sasuke was a little worse for wear, as he lacked Naruto's twofold regeneration, and concussions were tricky. A quick glance over his clipboard confirmed that the Uchiha would have to be on light training for a month, at least. With that being settled, Kakashi returned to the medical tent in search of his spirited Kunoichi. He was surprised that she had already been sent home, but after a split second of realizing the time, not really. She's probably already asleep, Kakashi thought as he slowly made his way towards her home. Her parents are civilians, so they're probably a nervous wreck and clinging onto her. I'll make sure her chakra signature is there, then head home. No need to cause a scene. When he entered her neighborhood, a tiny seed of worry settled in the pit of his stomach. A foreboding sense entered his mind, and he unconsciously braced himself for quite a scene. He did not expect to find Sakura hyperventilating in her destroyed home with two little black scrolls in front of her. Kakashi was frozen the moment he saw her. Not good. Bad, bad, bad. Despite Naruto's quick temper, Sakura was the most emotional member of his team. Though never one to dwell on negative emotions, Kakashi was getting a sneaky feeling about why that was the case. She was passionate in positive things and prone to openly sharing her affection towards all those around her, including strangers. For fuck's sake, she was prepared to argue with her sensei over the lives of two missing nin. She was a bleeding heart that endlessly poured out optimism. When confronted with pessimism, or things deemed negative, she reacted by not reacting at all. She clearly had a habit of repressing unwanted things, so Kakashi had to conclude that she lacked the experience in dealing with traumatic, or otherwise unfortunate events. In the life of a kunoichi, or shinobi, where death and horrific things were abundant, that lack of experience was highly dangerous. Naruto, at least, didn't ignore his feelings. He struggled to deal with them, but at least he was doing something about them. Sasuke openly embraced his anger and used it as a weapon. Strictly textbook, he was behaving like a perfect little shinobi. Sakura, though, didn't deal. She didn't acknowledge. She didn't do anything except try to smile through. That kind of behavior, if not rectified early, shattered shinobi and kunoichi. Kakashi would know. It's what almost did him in. Kakashi had planned on setting her up with a Yamanaka psychiatrist after the exams, as Chunin were required for an annual psychological evaluation, along with her other teammates. Therapy never worked for him, but he hoped it would be enough for her. Unfortunately, life struck before he had the chance to do that. So here his student was, having a panic attack, and Kakashi was at a loss at what to do. One thing at a time. Right. Kakashi flickered before her, and placed his hand on her shoulder. Her body stiffened and her wild eyes moved up to meet his. He kneeled in front of her, placing his other hand over her mouth. Calm down. Breathe with me. In. Out. In. Out. It took a solid 5 minutes before her breathing settled down that Kakashi felt reasonably confident she wouldn't pass out. He slowly withdrew his hands. Do you have family in the village? She shook her head, bits of her hair sticking to the dried blood on her cheek. Her pained green eyes trailed over to the 2 black scrolls on the table, and sheer agony rippled across her face. Kakashi's chest tightened uncomfortably at that, and he stood back up. Can you walk? She nodded her head, then after a small pause, she shakily tried to stand up. The moment she put pressure on her legs, though, they folded. Kakashi quickly grabbed her before she could fall, and he realized she was shivering slightly. She's freezing, he thought. Okay, if I were her age, no. What did I want someone to do for me after I saw my father? Away. I wanted to get away from that house as fast as I could. What about Keiko-chan and Tito-chan? She choked out. Kakashi readjusted his grip on her before he pocketed the 2 scrolls. Then he shifted his stance and he ran as fast as he could to his apartment. It was in the Umbu district, which was heavily guarded, so it was untouched by the invasion. He had to set her down for a brief minute before he could unlock the door, but it wasn't long before he brought her inside and took her straight towards the bathroom. Hot water. She has to warm up, he thought before practically tossing her inside his bathroom, and silently thanking himself for doing laundry before today, so there were no dirty clothes for her to creep on. Then he summoned Pakun, and hoped his favorite companion would be able to take care of the rest because he sure as shit had no idea what to do. Kakashi shut the door with a little too much haste than what was otherwise necessary, but he felt distinctly uncomfortable. Then he summoned the rest of his pack. When in doubt, ask the dogs. You all know Sakura, he began. Her parents died in the invasion today. Does she have a place to stay? Uroshi asked immediately. Kakashi scratched the back of his head. No. Well, actually she can stay here. Bull cocked his head. Do you even have a guest room? Kakashi shook his head. No one stayed over at his place. He didn't typically allow people inside his apartment to begin with. He could count on one hand the number of people he would allow to visit him at his place, and even less he would allow to crash on the couch. He never bothered with purchasing a spare futon because of that, or setting up a guest room. Bisk made a disapproving sound. Then you better hurry up and buy one. Get her some clothes, too, since she probably doesn't have a spare. Don't forget the underwear, Shiba added. When Kakashi's face colored, the pack chuckled at him. Don't be a prude. She's your student, and she needs help. What would Minato-sama do? Buy her clothes, Kakashi admitted, then sighed. Okay. He made a clone, gave said clone his wallet, and sent it off. Now what? Guriko sniffed loudly. Did she eat? I don't think so. Right. Feed her. Got it. The poor pup will need some affection, Uhei murmured. She's always so bright, and her Ka-chan was very affectionate, wasn't she? She'll need that affection now more than ever. The pack, as one, looked at the growing flustered Kakashi, before they exchanged exasperated looks. Bull answered for them, we will provide that affection, pup. Don't look so panicked. Relief settled over Kakashi, along with a mild sense of indignation. He could be affectionate. Probably. Maybe. Then again, given who needed the affection, it would probably be best if he kept his affections to a minimum. It would be tremendously awful if he gave her the wrong impression during such a difficult time. Besides, the pack was more experienced at this sort of thing than Kakashi was. The pack was the single reason Kakashi was still alive, figuratively and literally. While he would never take his life, like his father, he wasn't above taking on suicidal missions. If his dogs hadn't nursed him ever since he lost his father, he doubted even Minato-sensei's light would have been able to reach him. The clone returned, then, and he made a couple more to start cooking dinner and clearing the office. Once enough room was made to lay down the futon, he dismissed them and finished up dinner. He brought it back to the room, and before he had a chance to set it down, Sakura and Pakun presented themselves. She stood awkwardly in the doorway, no longer covered in dried blood, but a heavy weight seemingly pressed down on her. There wasn't that familiar gleam of love in her eyes. Until she noticed him, and for a split second Kakashi could see that spark, and he was filled with so much relief his shoulder sagged. The spark was gone, though, and the worry returned. Kakashi straightened his shoulders, and cocked his head towards the bed. Sit. She hesitated for a brief moment before she sat down. Bull pulled the covers over her lap, and the pack converged around her to form a tight circle. A ghost of a smile danced across her lips at that before disappearing when Pakun sat in her lap. Kakashi squatted beside her, outside the circle, and handed her a bowl of fried rice. Eat, Kakashi ordered. I don't care if you're not hungry. You need to eat. Drink the tea, too, it'll help you sleep. Sakura nodded, and began to meticulously eat. The longer the silence stretched on, the more worried Kakashi felt. Even after losing her patience, she still talked to him. She flirted, and teased, but she did none of that there. She was lifeless. Defeated. Kakashi felt distinctly. He felt very much not okay with that. He didn't like seeing her like that one bit. Minato-sensei would know what to do. He'd know the right words to say that would make her smile. Obito would be able to make her laugh. Rin would be able to comfort her. Anyone would be better than me. Shit. He had to rely on his dogs to comfort her because he was so awkward with it. Here he was concerned about her lack of experience dealing with crap like that, and he still refused to deal with it for others. Here was a prime time to earn that experience, and he shoved it off on his dogs. Kakashi rubbed at his face, putting those unhelpful thoughts away for the moment. Thinking about himself when Sakura needed him was unacceptable. He would deal with his demons eventually, but right now he had to deal with hers. When she was done eating, he put away her dishes and told her to get some sleep. He didn't know why he was actually surprised when she said she couldn't. He definitely was surprised when she said she was to blame for her parents' death. The idea was laughable to Kakashi, in a twisted sense of how he could perfectly understand why she would feel that way. He didn't dig the katana through his father's guts, but he shunned him like the rest of the villagers. He didn't force Obito to take his place, but his carelessness gave Obito the opportunity to sacrifice himself for Kakashi. He didn't get Rin kidnapped, but his lack of strength resulted in her death nonetheless. He could tell himself over and over it wasn't his fault. He would never believe himself, though. The idea that Sakura was about to enter that same kind of cycle as him was simply awful. He wouldn't even wish it upon his worst enemy, let alone his favorite student. When she began to sob uncontrollably, he instinctively reached out in a vain hope to comfort her. She threw himself into his arms, and for once he didn't feel quite so distressed with her physical contact. He didn't even mind that his shirt was thoroughly covered in tears and snot within the hour. All he could think about was that he wished he could make her smile. Eventually her sobs subsided to hiccups, and then slowly transitioned into heavy breathing. Kakashi didn't move from his spot for almost another hour, afraid of waking the exhausted girl. The dogs moved around him to give him proper support while he sat with her practically in his lap by that point. It'll take at least a week for them to finish repairing her home, Kakashi murmured to his dogs. Insurance could take upwards of a month to finish processing. It might be best if she stayed with you for the month, Baisuke softly replied. I doubt she'll be functional in only a week. Probably, Kakashi agreed reluctantly, then sighed for what felt like the 100th time that night. She'll have to go clothes shopping tomorrow, I bet. I'll see what I can do to get her insurance processed through. Pakun shifted slightly in Sakura's arms, licking at the goosebumps that crawled up and down her arms. Would you be able to? She's legally an adult now, since she became a full-fledged kunoichi. I'll figure something out, There's no need to bother her with unnecessary details. The pack agreed as one. Kakashi then began the process of gently tucking Sakura into her makeshift bed. The pack moved around her, pressing their bodies against her and offering her a kind of warmth that Kakashi couldn't provide. He left the room, and grimaced upon noticing the time. Already almost 5. He made a clone to stay with the pack and Sakura, and to start breakfast when Sakura would wake up. He changed into a clean uniform, brushed out the bits of dried blood from his hair, then left. He first went to Sakura's home to see if he could salvage any important documents that would help smooth the insurance process. He lucked out that the Haruno family had had the forethought to bury their important documents in a safe under the house. Standard procedure for most families that lived in a shinobi village. Houses were typically destroyed at least once a decade. He dug it up without any issue, and grabbed all of the documents. Kakashi flipped through all of the documents before he found the Haruno will. He schemed it, and felt immediately relieved that the will provided detailed instructions for their funeral arrangements, insurance claims, property, finances, stocks, etc. It included contact information for their lawyer, who lived in the capital, as well as possible guardianship for Sakura. Not that that mattered anyway, since Sakura was a legal adult in the eyes of Konoha. Kakashi made a clone to head to the messenger office to contact the family lawyer, while he personally went to the insurance department. He wasn't surprised to find a curvy line wrapped outside of the building. During after emergencies, the insurance department was one of the many buildings that had to remain open 24/7 until the Hokage declared the village had returned to vigilant peace. Unlucky for them, a new Hokage would have to be decided upon before they could catch a break. Kakashi stoically entered the back of the line, noting that many other shinobi and kunoichi were in the line, their faces blank. Kakashi rummaged through his pocket before he pulled out his worn ichaicha and began to reread the same page for the next couple of hours while he waited. When it was finally his turn to meet with an agent, Kakashi lazily entered a small office and sat down across from a tired middle-aged man with enough scars to rival Ibiki. The man, who Kakashi realized was the previous Umbu LT. Peacock, snorted upon seeing Kakashi. No fucking way the Umbu apartments were hit. Get the hell out. I'm not here for me, Kakashi responded, resisting the urge to smirk at the obviously irritated man. Annoying others had become a simple pleasure of Kakashi's. His younger self would have hated himself now, for a multitude of reasons, as irritating others was something only petulant and petty people did. Kakashi didn't care, though. He loved it. It was even better when his comrades tried to unnerve him, tried and failed every time. Until a certain pink-haired kunoichi entered his life. Now, Kakashi had a new appreciation for not being annoying. The retired shinobi gave Kakashi a disbelieving look. Who for, then? Student, Kakashi said, placing the multitude of documents onto the desk. Peacock picked them up, skimmed through them, and began to mutter to himself. It's not legal for you to, Peacock began, gesturing towards the paperwork, you know. Do this. I take it her parents are dead. Yep. Is she alive? Yep. Maimed? Nope. Any reason to not return to active duty? A slight hesitation. No. Then legally there is no reason for her not to be here to fill out the forms. Sensei, or not, you do not have the legal standing to fill out the appropriate information, or really do anything on her behalf. Kakashi smiled, feeling a trifle annoyed. I'm sure she won't press charges. The Hokage. I highly doubt the new Hokage would press charges, either, Kakashi pressed. It's not right, Peacock reiterated, shaking his head. And you should be ashamed of yourself for asking me to do this. Kakashi continued to smile. Peacock gave a groan. You are not above the law, dog. I would never imply such a thing. All I'm suggesting is that you help me help my student, from one shinobi to another. He glared at Kakashi, then. If I say no, are you going to sick your damn pack on me? I would never use my dogs for such a thing, Kakashi said, mock aghast. Not that pack, Peacock snapped. The doi-eyed umbu that worship the ground you walk on. All, what, 50 of them? Kakashi shrugged, not disagreeing with the possible threat. I can't help it if I make an impression. He shook his head, sighing again. Fine. Fine. If I get fired over this. You won't. If I get fired over this, I'll set your apartment on fire. Kakashi was so impressed. That's a completely boring threat coming from X-Umbu. Sometimes the simpler things work the best, X-Peacock responded, then paused. Shut up and start signing. A few days later, Kakashi had gone out to get some food. His cooking skills were limited, and though she didn't say anything, he was certain Sakura was growing tired of his pasta/rice. Kakashi hoped a change of pace would bring a smile back on her face. Not the fake shit she tried to pull the other day, though. When Kakashi saw that disgustingly fake smile the other day, he felt physically ill. Hindsight, he wished he had handled it better than immediately throwing his book at her, but he was glad he got the point across. Kakashi's eyes drifted over towards his Sakura, and he wasn't surprised, no less disappointed, to find her dull eyes staring listlessly ahead. He never thought he would have reached the day where he wished for his 12-year-old student to flirt with him. Kakashi slowed his pace, and Sakura immediately matched his speed, her eyes flickering up to his. Upon seeing his face, a tiny smile stretched across her lips and a spark of affection entered her eyes. Kakashi reached over to her and patted her head. She reached up to grab his hand, probably to hold it, but as her fingers barely grazed the top of his hand, she seemed to jerk and shove her hands back into the pocket of her hoodie. Kakashi repressed his sigh, gave her head another good pat, and then continued on. About 5 minutes later, they arrived at the quaint tea shop that Kakashi knew had excellent sweets, and while he did not have a sweet tooth, he remembered Naruto mentioning that Sakura did. After they had lunch, Kakashi planned on picking up the new pup for Sakura, and hopefully the combination of the two would cheer her up. When Kakashi stopped walking, Sakura hurried to catch up to him, and when she did, he patted her on the head again. Her smile was a bit bigger than last time, and it reminded Kakashi of her usual smile. He reflexively smiled back at her, his pat becoming gentler. See? That's a good smile. Her cheeks transitioned into a rosy complex, and her smile turned into a proper grin. It warmed Kakashi to see a glimpse of his student being happy. He never would have thought that he would become attached to his students already. Was this what Minato felt like whenever the man was able to make Kakashi smile? It was a surprisingly nice feeling. His students were the antithesis of his past. They weren't covered in blood, gore, or cynicism. Even Sasuke still had that spark of childish hope in his eyes from time to time. He wasn't lost, like many of Kakashi's comrades were. Kakashi's precious students were tainted by war, or anything else of that ilk. While they certainly had their struggles, and their own demons to deal with, they weren't overburdened by them. They still had the kind of life and light in their eyes that Kakashi lost decades ago. In an odd way, being with his students was comforting to Kakashi. So seeing one of his students, his normally most energetic one at that, so despondent was uncomfortable. Kakashi was pulled from his thoughts when he thought he smelled someone familiar. Kurenai and Asuma approached him and Sakura, and he casually struck up a conversation as he tried to pinpoint that scent. His eyes roamed around until Itachi. Then there was a sudden, entirely unexpected kick to the back of Kakashi's knees. He was so caught off guard by it that it took too many seconds long to recover from it, and by that point a pinkette had already leapt over to stand between him and Itachi. And her eyes were locked with Itachi's. He barely heard her whisper the word pain, and then she fell forward. Kakashi grabbed her before she fell entirely in the water, his mind whirling in disbelief and horror. "Let's go, Kisame," Itachi said softly, and Kakashi's gaze snapped up in reflex, but Itachi was not focused on him. For a millisecond the missing nin was staring at his student, and then dozens of crows emerged from him and he and Kisame were gone. For a split second, Kakashi's body tensed to follow them, but then he remembered his unconscious "please don't be dead" student in his arms and his attention returned to her. Kurenai let out a quiet gasp, and hurried to kneel beside Kakashi, her right hand glowing a soft green as she placed it over Sakura's forehead. Kurenai began, then hesitated. "She needs medical assistance. Her chakra structures are strained. We have to hurry." "What about it?" Asuma began, but Kakashi was already gone. Anger surged through him every time he saw her face. Why would she do that? Kakashi thought, a strange sense of disbelief permeating his thoughts. What possible delusion entered into her head that she thought she could stand up against a missing nin? She had no trouble letting me fight Zabuza before, so why now? Was it her way of dealing with grief? Throw herself into hopeless situations and hope for the enemy to be merciful and end her suffering? Fuck, that was no way to live. That mindset would ruin her. One of Sakura's friends, Hinata, passed by Kakashi in the hallway of the hospital. Hinata smiled at him and bowed, and Kakashi returned it with a polite head dip, before continuing his furious pacing. He couldn't believe Sakura was that stupid. He couldn't believe he let her get the drop on him. Nope. No. He was not going to play that game with himself. He did what he could at the time, and he had no way of knowing his student would be such a dumbass. There was harsh pounding of footsteps and Kakashi was surprised to find one of Naruto's shadow clones racing down the hallway. Kakashi-sensei. Naruto, what are you doing here? Kakashi asked. It's just a clone, sensei, Naruto dismissed. There was this old couple talking about a fight in Konoha with a pink-haired kunoichi. Of course the gossip reached Naruto, Kakashi thought. Why wouldn't it? Sakura's alive, Kakashi said. Is that why you sent a clone? To check on her? Yeah. I went by her house first, but it's destroyed and I didn't know where she and her family were staying, so I was really confused on where to go to next. But then I realized that if she was in some kind of fight, she would be at a hospital. So I got here and I asked the lady up front if Sakura was here and she sent down up here, and here I am. So the real you is with Jiraiya-sama? Kakashi inquired. Naruto nodded firmly. Yeah. Clones are pretty neat. Sakura-chan told me how when a clone gets destroyed I can keep its memories. That is certainly true. Naruto beamed. It's pretty handy. But, anyway, where is Sakura? How is she? Kakashi tilted his head towards Sakura's room, and Naruto practically threw himself inside. Sakura-chan. Oh, hi Hinata-chan. Naruto closed the door behind him, preventing Kakashi from hearing Hinata's response. Kakashi scratched the back of his head, his irritation still present. Thinking about it won't change anything. If when she wakes up, I'll talk to her, then, Kakashi thought. End of Kakashi's POV, first-person POV OC, Sakura. Kakashi wheeled us home, and I gently stroked Bright Heart while cooing to her. We bought her own food bowl, water bowl, along with chew toys, a blanket, a bed, and some special shampoo to use for her scarred skin. As we rounded another corner on our way back to his apartment, we stopped short when an out-of-breath Sasuke leapt down at us from the rooftops. His eyes were wide, with an almost manic gleam in them as he looked us over, before his gaze locked in on me. I gave him a smile and a wave, unintentionally waking Bright Heart up from her slumber. Sasuke's face morphed into mild horror. Can you walk? I'm physically capable of doing so, but it would be counterintuitive with resting up, I answered him. Don't worry, it's nothing permanent. Naruto's bringing back the best medical kunoichi the world has ever known, and she'll fix me up good as new. Relief settled over his face, and Kakashi cleared his throat. You were looking for us. I ran into Hinata. She mentioned that Sakura had a run-in with Itachi and was in the hospital. Sasuke stumbled over Itachi's name, spitting it out like a bad piece of fruit. I reached towards Sasuke, grabbing his hand and giving it a comforting squeeze. I smiled as warmly and as surely as I could. Don't worry, duck butt. Everything is okay. I'll be fine. Ida-chan didn't do anything that I wasn't prepared for. That made his eyes narrow, and I could practically feel Kakashi's annoyed glare at me from behind, and Bright Heart let out a soft growl, clearly unhappy to be awoken from her nap. Sasuke looked down at Bright Heart, his expression unreadable. Did you get a puppy, or something? This is our fur baby, I told Sasuke, patting the grumpy Bright Heart on the head. She is not. Kakashi let out a sigh. She is not our fur baby. I covered Bright Heart's ears with a scandalized gasp. How dare you say that in front of our child? So you're both fine, Sasuke interrupted firmly. Of course we are, I dismissed. I wouldn't let anything happen to Kakashi-sensei. Even if that means throwing yourself in front of a S-ranked missing nin, Kakashi muttered. Especially if it means throwing myself in front of Ida-chan and Kisame-sama, I said firmly, then sighed dreamily at the thought of Kisame opening my presents. I wondered what face he made when he saw everything. I really hoped he would wear everything I made for him. I bet he would look absolutely irresistible in mittens. Sasuke shook his head in exasperation at me. That man is not someone to take lightly. He's a monster. I held up Bright Heart to Sasuke and the puppy protested heavily at being lifted up from her comfy spot in my lap. But I got Bright Heart because of him. How could a monster give me such a cute puppy? I gave you the puppy, Kakashi corrected, clearly offended that I was giving Itachi all the credit. So you admit it, I cried out. She came from you, and since I am her mother, that makes you the father. Ergo, Bright Heart is our fur baby. Kakashi made a funny frustrated noise. I'm leaving before I get sucked into your twisted little family, Sasuke informed us. You're the uncle. Please provide her with love, support, and treats. Sasuke stared at me another moment before he promptly turned on his heel and left. Pork is her favorite, I called after him. Only when he was out of sight, did I tilt my head to look up at Kakashi and wink at him. Thank you for having a fur baby with me. Kakashi flicked my nose. Bright Heart was officially the single cutest patootie to have ever breathed. There was no argument, no contest, absolutely no opposition. She was undeniably adorable, and if anyone ever tried to tell me otherwise, I would unleash my villainous mind upon them and inflict unspeakable horrors. Horrors that were so horribly horrible simply thinking about them would horrify someone. Bright Heart gave me another snarl as she tried to gnaw my hand. She stopped putting significant effort into after about an hour of returning home from shopping with Kakashi. She was curled into my lap, alternating between biting my right hand, and simply holding it in her mouth and growling. My left hand kept petting her as gently as I could. I sat on Kakashi's couch, entirely enamored by the adorable puppy that now depended upon me. Your home should be finished with its repair within the next day or so, Kakashi said, entering the living room and taking a seat beside me. My eyes flickered up towards him, before I returned my attention to Bright Heart. I'll help you settle back in, if you'd like. Thank you, I thanked quietly, hesitating for a moment before asking, what do I do about Bright Heart when I go on missions? I know we got automatic feeders and waterers, and I'm sure I could hook up a doggy door for her, and build a large enough fence in the backyard that she won't escape, but I don't want her to be all alone. There are plenty of options, Kakashi reassured me. You can set up a daily D-rank mission and hire a genin team to play with her for a few hours, and take care of her. You can have them take care of her for however many times of the day you like. There are hotels for her to stay at if you would rather she receive constant supervision. I'm sure some of your friends would also be more than happy to take care of her. I felt relieved at the many options. Yeah, you're right. Hina-chan and Ino-chan would be more than happy to let her stay with them when I'm gone. Kakashi I smiled at me, and I couldn't resist beaming back at him. For the first time in a while, I felt happy. Between Bright Heart's adorableness and Kakashi's sheer amazingness, it was hard to dwell on not okay things, and when I didn't think about not okay things I felt pretty okay. Which was spectacular. I much rather preferred feeling okay than the other stuff. Like who boy, did I not want to deal with that other stuff? That other stuff could stay behind a 50-kilometer high wall, millions of light years away from me, please and thank you. It was early in the morning the next day. Hardly past 5, really, with the sun barely glimpsing over the horizon and bringing light into the grey apartment. Last night was the first night I slept without dreams, and when I woke up to find Bright Heart snuggled against me, I was overcome with emotions that I began to hysterically cry. Of course that woke up Kakashi immediately, and he came running in only to find me laughing while hysterically crying. What's wrong www with me ee? I had cried out between hiccups. He flailed a bit. If I knew, we wouldn't be in this mess. Ah, good times. Anyway, so after I had calmed down it was decided that we would both just get up for the day at 3-something in the morning. Kakashi moved me to the couch and shoved a handful of adventure novels in my lap before heading off to get food for breakfast. He returned with breakfast dumplings. He also made me promise I wouldn't ask the goggle gods to introduce me to Obito while I was gone. I held the adorable lump that was Bright Heart near my face before I began to nuzzle her. I only stopped when I heard 3 sharp taps on the window in the living room. Kakashi got up from his spot on the couch and opened it to a brown and black hawk with a carrier tube tied to it. It was odd to see it so early in the morning, but I guess 5 wasn't that early. Kakashi opened the carrier hawk's message, remarking that it was addressed to me. He read it over briefly, before folding it back up and handing me a small envelope that was attached to it. Your house has finished reconstruction. Insurance for the house is inside. Your parents' life insurance is also inside. I also took the liberty of contacting your family's lawyer. He should be arriving before the week ends. Okay, was my response. What else could I have said? He shifted, and I looked down at Bright Heart, who was curled in my lap. Her one good eye constantly flickered around. I ran my fingers through her fur, my touch growing lighter when I ran over the bald, or scarred spots. Do you, Kakashi began, then paused, do you want to see it? I nodded my head, even though I didn't really want to see it. Kakashi got out my wheelchair, and I awkwardly got into it. Bright Heart made a small protest in the back of her throat that I had to transition from being on the couch with her to a creaky wheelchair. Then we headed out. I held Bright Heart close to me, as close as I could, at least without making her too uncomfortable, and when the sun hit me, I couldn't resist smiling. No matter what happened, the sun always came up. Being with Kakashi was also nice. Fangirling aside, I took great comfort in his presence. The fact that he stayed utterly calm and assured the entire time made me feel millions better. It helped me shove aside the heart-stopping, gut-clenching, bitterly cold guilt I felt any time my thoughts lingered too far away from anything happy. It was easier to focus on happy with him, because he made me happy. That cloud looks like a slice of pizza, I told Kakashi, nodding towards said cloud. He looked at it, moving slowly as he wheeled me towards my ho-ho-home. Kakashi let out a hum sound. Looks more like the tip of a kunai to me. I could see that. I prefer pizza more than kunai, though, to be honest. Can't say I've had the pleasure of eating pizza before. I can make you some, I offered immediately, titling my head back and looking up at him. His dark eyes flickered down towards me, and I felt a sudden surge of happiness in my chest. It was so unexpected, I wasn't able to tone down my beaming smile that ensued. Kakashi blinked in surprise at me, before he let out a quiet chuckle and flicked my nose. I gave a squawk, and reached up to swat his hand away, but he already withdrew it and continued to wheel me towards my ho-home. The village looked better. Life had breathed itself into the streets of Konoha again, one could hardly find a damaged street or area. As the sun slowly rose into the sky, the people rose with it and there was amicable chatter and groggy laughter filling the streets once more. The walk to my home was pleasant because of it. When we entered the neighborhood, I felt my stomach churn, and when we got to my home, my world titled for a brief second. There was no garden, nor any cute stone path to lead up to a painted red door and a worn welcome mat. It was a small 2-story house that held no personality or life. Kakashi seemed to sense my unease because he placed a tentative hand on my shoulder. I leaned my head against the hand, closed my eyes, and took a deep breath. I took every bit of grief I felt inside of me, and I shoved it away. I was not the type of person to dwell on such unhappy thoughts on things that I could not change. Ka-chan was dead. To-chan was dead. Nothing could be done or said to change that fact. They loved me. And I loved them. We all knew this, and we never doubted our love for one another for a second. Nothing could be done or said to change that fact. There was a house in front of me, though, that I could change. I had their memories, and thoughts, and hopes for me, that I could still act upon. I could honor them. I would honor them in a way that I was certain would make them happy. I could hope that, somehow, that I could still make them happy. If I didn't have that hope, I would not give that hope up. No use dwelling on the what-ifs. When I reopened my eyes, the house seemed a bit warmer. I looked up at Kakashi, a smile on my face, and I said, I'm going to have a lot of work today. Kakashi stared at me a moment, his single eye widening briefly and then it softened. He gave me a smile that warmed every part of my body, and filled me with a kind of determined energy. He ruffled my hair and began to wheel me towards the front door. He effortlessly picked up the entire wheelchair over the front 2 steps. "Ma, let's take a look around and take stock of what you want and need. Afterwards, we can shop for furniture and paint. What we don't find, we'll order." I beamed at my sensei, and Bright Heart rolled over in her sleep with a quiet snort, hugging my right hand that I kept on her. We toured the rebuilt home, and I told Kakashi what I planned to do in each room. When someone entered our home, they were first greeted to a simple hallway. At the end of the hallway were the stairs that lead upstairs. On the left side of the hallway, before the stairs, was an open doorway to our kitchen. Mirroring that on the right side was an open doorway that led to the living room. The kitchen took up a decent-sized corner of the house, and through it, heading towards our backyard, was the dining room. My family did not typically use the dining room. We preferred to eat in the kitchen at a quaint white wooden table, and instead it was used for To-chan's woodwork, or Ka-chan's painting. The living room took up the entire bottom right side of our home, except for a small toiletry room in the back right corner. Ka-chan had hundreds of little knickknacks she'd collect, all in a flower or cat-related theme. She hung her finished pieces on the wall when she didn't want to sell them. By the time I had turned 9, she had covered every inch of the wall and had to start placing paintings in the hallways and in their bedroom. Out the back door was a small patio To-chan made when I was 5. It came out from the house about 3 meters before transitioning into steps towards Ka-chan's prized lemon and cherry trees. Heading up the stairs, at the very top there was a door to the immediate left that led to the master bedroom. To the right was a hallway that wrapped around the staircase and had 2 doors on it. The first door led to a small storage room, and the next door at the end led to my room. My room had an attached bathroom, just as Ka-chan's and To-chan's room did. That was our home. To-chan painted our kitchen walls the color of my eyes when I was born. He was a hobbyist woodworker, and created beautiful pale wainscoting panels around the house. Unfortunately, those panels no longer existed since they weren't part of the original design. Kakashi mentioned he knew someone in woodworking that he would be willing to talk to for me, and I beamed at him in response. I wanted to create an exact replica of our kitchen. Quite a large chunk of happy memories came from the family meals, or weekend baking with Ka-chan and To-chan. There wasn't anything I wanted to do differently in the kitchen, and it felt like a nice way to honor those inordinately joyful memories. Perhaps it was unhealthy to want to recreate it. Maybe once it was done, whenever I looked into the kitchen I would feel sad all over again. But I didn't want that to happen, and I didn't think they would want that, either. I wanted to make even more happy memories inside that lovely kitchen. Even if it was awkward, or even painful at first, I believed it was for the best. I decided to turn the dining room area into a workshop for my poisons. Kakashi made a remark about how I probably shouldn't keep toxins so close to food, but I decided that that was all part of the thrill. I wasn't sure on all the colors I wanted to use, or what furniture I should purchase. All I knew was that I wanted my home to be as bright and warm as I could make it. Kakashi mentioned that he was sure that there would be plenty of helpful employees at the furniture stores that would be more than happy to assist me in that endeavor. When we went upstairs to the master bedroom, I felt uncomfortable again. Even more so when Kakashi asked, "Are you going to sleep here now?" I don't know," I admitted quietly. "You should," Kakashi told me. "The sooner you replace old memories with new ones, the better. Especially if you intend to stay here for any long periods of time." "I intend to stay here until the day I die," I declared stubbornly. Kakashi chuckled at that, and onwards we continued. When it was time to look at the backyard, I realized I would have to put in a fence for Bright Heart, too. And that Ka-chan's precious trees were long gone. I wonder if I should bother replanting them now, or wait until after Pain's invasion. I wondered. Probably should wait until after Konoha gets destroyed again. Ugh. Once the tour was over, it was nearing noon, but neither of us were particularly hungry. We decided we would eat after shopping. I hoped to get the essential furniture that day, or tomorrow, so I could move out of Kakashi's apartment. It was incredibly kind of Kakashi to allow me to stay with him, but I understood that Kakashi was a man of intense privacy and having me live with him was likely taxing. After lunch, we began to head out towards one of the furniture stores. To our surprise, though, Sasuke ran into us. I noticed he had a wrapped-up bundle in his arms. "There you are," Sasuke said, then frowned. "What are you doing?" "We're shopping for furniture for my home," I told Sasuke. "Kakashi knows the best places." Sasuke's brow furrowed. "Why?" "My home was destroyed. Reconstruction finished last night, so now I have to fill it back up with furniture and whatnot." "Ah," Sasuke said, then paused. "Why aren't your parents?" "Unease. They didn't. He realized. Sasuke shifted uncomfortably, his gaze lowered and his head turned away. "Do you guys need help?" Kakashi, I smiled. "More the merrier, right?" "Right," I agreed, holding Brightheart closer to me. The puppy let out a soft growl, but resettled. Sasuke looked down at the bundle in his arms. I was going to return the bento boxes that your Ka-chan loaned to me." "Do you?" "I'll take them back," I told him, "and I'll use them to make your lunches for her." He gave me what was clearly his hilariously set attempt to smile. "Oh, honey," I sighed, gesturing for him to come closer. "Come here so I can pat your cheek and remind you that you are cared for and supported." "Shut up," Sasuke snapped. "Children, behave," Kakashi said in an entirely condescending tone. "Love, I can't promise that," I told him. "Misbehaving earned me a fur baby with you." "What else could I earn by misbehaving, I wonder?" "Misbehaving did not earn you a fur baby," Kakashi corrected me. "I gave her to you to help you, not reinforce your sheer stupidity." "You aren't denying she's a fur baby anymore?" Sasuke questioned. I clapped my hands with delight. "Oh. You're right, Sasuke, he didn't deny Brightheart was his fur baby." "I shouldn't have to deny it in every sentence," Kakashi immediately defended. "Don't encourage her, Sasuke." "Why not?" Sasuke asked with a shrug. "If it means she's not bothering me." "So you would use your poor sensei as pervert bait?" Kakashi demanded mockingly. "How cruel." "She also bribes me with pizza," Sasuke added, "so." He shrugged again, smirking tauntingly at Kakashi. "I guess the only response to that is, youthful course level 5 when you're ready to return to duty," Kakashi said cheerfully. Sasuke and I winced. About 2.5 weeks had passed since we went shopping for furniture. Sasuke and Kakashi helped me set my home up, with the occasional obligated grumble about it. Most of the furniture I wanted had to be ordered, unfortunately, so it took about a week for everything to arrive. It gave us plenty of time to build the fence in the backyard, though, and paint. Once I had the essential furniture, though, at the end of that week I moved back into my home. It was awkward getting around in a wheelchair, and the upstairs was essentially off limits for the moment, so I slept on the futon downstairs with Brightheart. Kakashi checked up on me about once a day to make sure I hadn't done a ritual to meet up with Obito. I was really regretting saying that. To my surprise, Sasuke visited me about once a day, too. He helped me make lunch. Typically, I showed him a new tomato-themed recipe every day. He really loved Italian food, and once the food was eaten and he felt confident that I wouldn't die, he left. We didn't talk a lot during his visits, but that was okay. The fact that he made the effort at all meant a lot to me. Hinata was the next person to find about my family issue, since she came to visit me as soon as she was able. It turned into a bit of a crying fest, so I would rather not think about it. She visited me every day at breakfast, though. She stayed for a few hours, knitting things with me and indulging in my Kisame-involved fantasies. On the day Naruto returned with Tsunade, Hinata was planting poisonous plants in my front garden with me. Sasuke had arrived a BTI earlier than usual to give me a handful of seeds from his Tochan's garden, in exchange for a calzone. Hinata came at her usual time with seeds of her own, knowing about the exchange, along with some gardening tools. The day was warm, and pleasant. I decided to plant the garden in front of the house, so Brightheart could have free reign of the backyard without worry. We had built a privacy fence around the house, then painted it white. I bought a nice doghouse out back, along with a sunning mat for Brightheart to lay on. She loved it. There might not have been a patio like before, but that just meant more room for Bright Heart to play in. Hinata patted down the soft earth after she planted the last of the seeds. I mixed the fertilizer in with the large watering can while she did so, and then said, "I don't suppose you know how often I'm supposed to water these things." "I wrote all the instructions you need to know in here," Sasuke said, stepping outside the house with a perfectly wrapped calzone in one hand. He tossed me a clean small black leather notebook. I flipped it open to find extremely delicate-looking handwriting inside. "Why do you have better handwriting than me?" I whined. Sasuke sneered at me. "Because I don't rush things like you. I can be patient," I protested. "I patiently waited for these seeds." "You badgered me for them for days," Sasuke immediately denied. Hinata giggled at that. "I'm sure SHN didn't badger you for them, Sasuke-san." Sasuke gave her a deadpan look, which made Hinata erupt into another fit of giggles. Her contagious happiness actually got a small twitch from Sasuke's lips, and a giggle from me. "Thank you for the notebook," I thanked Sasuke, flipping through a few more pages. "Oh. I wrote down a few extra things," Sasuke admitted. "Not everything from Tosan's garden provided seeds this season, but since they're still helpful I thought you would include them in your garden eventually." Sasuke had filled the notebook with detailed explanations on each plant he had in his garden and a few, I suspected, that he did not have. The gesture was admirable, and it warmed me. I may not have been his favorite person in the world, but I was glad that I had somehow managed to worm my way into his circle of tolerable people. "Thank you," I said again, trying to convey my sincerity. He shrugged, a sheepish look on his face for a millisecond before he turned his head away so I couldn't see. "It's whatever. We're teammates. I'll see you tomorrow." "Goodbye, Sasuke-san," Hinata called after him, and I echoed her. Sasuke gave a small wave without looking back as he exited my front yard. He shut the gate behind him, and was gone in the next moment. Hinata and I went back to working on the yard in silence for another 10 minutes before we were interrupted by a joyous shout. At once, our heads lifted up to find Naruto throwing open our gate and tackling into me. "Sakura-chan." I let out an umph as my dear friend knocked the air right out of me. Naruto released the hug and sat on my belly, his sparkling blue eyes lit up with utter adoration and happiness. His trademark grin was endearing, and I couldn't resist grinning excitedly back at him. "My son. I brought you the big boobed hag," Naruto exclaimed, turning his head to look at Tsunade who was staring at the display with plain amusement. I tilted my head and waved at her and Shizune, who had just arrived on the scene looking extremely flustered and holding the cute little piggy wiggy. "Nice to meet you beautiful young lady," I called out. "I'm Sakura Haruno. And that's my waifu, Hinata Hyuga." "I'm the waifu of Sakura-chan," Hinata introduced herself. Naruto pouted. "Wha? How come Sakura-chan gets a waifu? What's a waifu?" I smiled and patted Naruto's cheek. "Hina-chan can be your waifu, too. You have to treat her well, though." "Can you do that, dear?" Naruto rolled off me as Hinata let out a yip of surprise from my words. Naruto hopped over to Hinata and beamed at her. "Wanna be my waifu, Hinata-chan?" "Oh okay," Hinata wheezed, smushing her tomato-colored cheeks. "It's a pleasure to meet you all," Shizune responded hesitantly. "I'm Shizune, and this is Tsunade-sama." "I heard one of you was a dumbass," Tsunade said bluntly, eyeing me. I sat up. "I am the queen of dumbasses. How may I help you?" "The brat persuaded me to take a look at you," Tsunade said, entering my front yard and striding towards me. The woman was as gorgeous in real life as she was in the anime, and I openly ogled her. Tsunade squatted down beside me, her right hand flaring to life with soothing green chakra. She gently placed her hand over my forehead and my entire body began to tingle. A solid 30 seconds ticked by in silence of feeling tingly before she pulled back and smirked. "There. You're training in medical, right? You know how to rehabilitate yourself after being wheelchair for so long." I grinned at her. "Hell yeah. Thanks, gorgeous." She preened. "It was nothing. You, my sweet, are the antithesis of nothing," I purred. "Can you not flirt with every attractive woman you see?" Naruto wondered out loud. I batted my eyelashes and gave a wink to Tsunade, causing the poor woman to look extremely uncomfortable. Tsunade laughed at me. Ah. A female young Jiraiya. I've seen it all. I bet I can show you more, I teased. Call me in 20 years, kiddo, Tsunade dismissed, standing back up. Let's go, Shizune. Call me whenever you're bored and I will liven your night, I called after her as she and Shizune left. Alright, now someone help me up so I can start doing my rehab. Naruto and Hinata moved at the same time towards me, both grabbing my opposite arm and lifting me up. I wobbly stood on my feet, triumph blooming inside of me. I couldn't resist beaming at my two precious friends, and they both smiled back at me in return. This calls for a celebration, I declared. I demand a cake. I'll make it, Hinata exclaimed excitedly, a spark in her eyes. Naruto's face lit up. I wanna eat the leftover batter. Only if you help me, Hinata told him. You got yourself a deal. Omaka number 2, because why not? I sauntered into one of Konoha's bars because I had seen a sexy ass walk in moments before. My eyes were rewarded for my decision upon finding the nymph of sexiness, Anko, heading up to the bar with a leer on her face. I followed behind her, hopping into the seat right next to her and purring, "May I buy you some dango, my goddess?" Anko turned her head and her face split into a smirk/grin. She draped an arm around my shoulders. "AHH. My favorite slave. Why, I suppose I can grant you the blessing of purchasing dango for me." I mock shuddered. "Oh. My darling, you're too kind to me. Just wait until the clock hits midnight, cutie," Anko responded, pulling me closer and leering at the clock above the wall. "I'll show you a world you've never seen." I placed a hand over my heart and made a dramatic sigh of joy. "Oh, Anko-sama. Just keep saying my name, sweetie." The bartender gave us a horrified look. 10 minutes before midnight, many plates of dango and bottles of sake surrounded us, along with a good portion of drunk shinobi. We were cheering over some form of game that I didn't entirely understand, some form of strip poker, but I was somehow winning because I was the last one still fully dressed, not counting the shoes I had to take off. There was chanting, jeering, and laughter, but most importantly there was a countdown to midnight. Now, I didn't know what happened at midnight, but I had a feeling that it was going to be awesome because Anko was really excited about it. And anything that got Anko excited had to be fun. Unfortunately for me, I didn't find out that night. Because a certain bartender got in contact with a certain teacher barely in time. I placed my cards down and let out a smirk of victory when the man across from me let out a cry of despair, because he knew he had to get rid of his pants, but he still had his boxers. The others cheered around me, and just before the man got up to strip, the door flew open. And there was a hand over my eyes and away I was whisked. "Anko-sama." "No, my slave." Anko cried out. "Come back to me." "No, no, 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 no," Kakashi denied, throwing me over his shoulder and practically sprinting out of that bar. "Holy fuck, no. You are 14. But I have the heart of a horny 20-something-year-old, I sobbed. "No. Take me back to my goddess." "Are you drunk?" "No," I lied. Then I pinched his booty because he threw me over his shoulder, and it was totally defenseless. He threw me into the river. That's it for part 6. Thank you for watching and see you on the next video.